Okay, there's quite a bit to unpack here. We're looking at our cost to uh, do the work that we drew up and organized in our specifications and our elevations. So let's just take a second and understand exactly what we're pricing here. When we draw the elevations, we know that they're figuring parts and labor based on what was configured for the system. At the time that the elevation is saved, however, whatever that configuration is, that information is used to calculate the part and labor requirements at the time the elevation is saved. If you save an elevation and then change the configuration, you'll need to reopen and save the elevation again to have those changes reflected in the parts and labor requirements for that elevation. Now, when you first load this page, it's going to find all the cheapest, lowest cost items and select the lowest prices. So we can also make some changes to those selections, and I'll show you how to do that. But if you rebuild the pricing, you can have the option to keep your selection. So why would you rebuild the pricing? Well, perhaps you want to add another type of glass or another type of price for another type of part, or uh, you know, different vendor for screws. When you add those prices, after this is generated, you're going to need to update the pricing so that it can get those prices and take them into consideration. So if we click on the specification, it'll drop down and give us a breakdown of, the way that it's organized. So we have caulking, consumable supplies. So you can click on any of these line items and find out exactly what are we talking about. Okay, so masking tape. Okay, probably for caulk joints. Yep. Okay. So we can look at this item and you'll notice that it could be purchased from more than one vendor. So in the context of a system, we have a part. That part could potentially be purchased from more than one vendor, okay? And that's where we have basically an item that is required to build the system, and that's independent of the different sources that maybe can sell the item to us. So you can put in vendors and parts for your own company based on how and where you purchase them. But if you were to add another tape supplier at this point, you would want to update your pricing in order for that price to become available for selection here. We also have the ability to, look at parts. So we have part perimeter sealant sausages by volume, right? That could be anything. So we have $7.95, $9.95, a number of different products that could be used for that purpose. By default, it looks like we're choosing contractor's weather seal. Maybe I want to use the polyurethane product just so that it can be painted. So when I select these parts, it'll update the pricing accordingly. Something of critical importance to draw your attention to. I mentioned that the specifications for the glass were informational. They display on the proposal, but they don't actually influence the selected glass, okay? And you'll notice the part that is configured to the system, it's quite generic. There are no colors or finishes or coatings. The part itself here that's selected that we're going to purchase at $14.37, that's simply clear on clear on clear, right? It's going to be the cheapest option in this list. Okay, the cheapest option is selected by default. If we wanted a solar band 70, maybe we could choose solar band 70. It's a higher cost, Right now we're at 81.35. If we select this part, it's going to update the price for us. Now we're at 98.14. Okay. We could do the same similar thing here. Okay, maybe we'll find a solar band 70. Okay, gray works for me. Now, that's the way that you need to select the class. We can take a look at labor. Okay, the labor rates that you have here are by default, when you first load this page, they're going to be imported from your proposal settings. So you can set default labor rates for your company. You can also change them up in here. Okay, you can adjust labor up or down by changing the price based on your expectations. Maybe it's more than 20 man days, and so rather than reconfiguring the labor for the system, you just bump up the labor rate. Or maybe the work is going to be done on 2 or 3 stories, going to take a little more time than the ground floor. One of the ways you could address that is by changing the labor rate. If you want to try and verify, the accuracy of the labor that is included, you have a total cost, okay, per square foot to perform the work. That works out to 20 man days. A man day is an 8-hour increment of time. So we multiply 20.2 times 8. That'll give us the total number of hours. For each of these elevations, we have a cost per square foot, and then we'll also have a breakdown. Manufacturing doesn't give us much of a breakdown, but we can have frame installation, caulking, glazing. So these are basically just different ways of organizing labor into categories. There can be subcategories of each of these, but for our purposes, installing frame type A, it's 2.27 hours. Actually doing the whole installation of that frame type, it's 11.55 a square foot for labor. Another convenient double check is the cost per square foot of providing the type of work. It's useful, you can usually figure out if you're in the right ballpark or not. Now, you'll sometimes have a finish color warning, and if there's a missing price, it'll show up a red message with the information here being highlighted in red. So when we get these warnings, we can see, okay, a transom sash, okay, it's an allowance item. There appears that there is no dark bronze finish price for this item in the database. Okay, maybe that changes the cost basis by $1. It doesn't appear to be a very expensive item. But in the case that it were a significant discrepancy, then we could update our own prices and make sure that we had ourselves covered. So once we get through looking at the composition of, our costs here, this is again our cost of providing. Once we're comfortable with that, we'll proceed to the next step in creating the proposal. We'll add expenses. Those expenses being a lift, maybe a connex, maybe travel, those expenses which are not directly related to the work itself.